We are learning.
which was fabulous. Okay, so I'm Julie. I am one of the co-founders of Rev Health, and I was one of Maddie's patients actually. So I don't know how much we've really talked about that before, but we were both working on businesses to help women's health, and we met because she was helping me optimize my health. And we just looked at each other one day and said, maybe we should combine forces. And so my dad now calls us the dynamic duo.
I love it.
So I'm a startup person, and I had a startup many years ago that was like a wellness retreat company. We were sort of like an Orbitz, but for yoga retreats. And then I ran a consultancy, and now I'm doing this. And I'll pass it to Maddie.
Yes, I am the other co-founder of Rêve Health. And yes, I worked with Julie. She's absolutely amazing. And we are so happy to bring Rêve Health forward to everyone. I had a private practice in Boston for a while. Prior to that, I was in Montana working at more of an integrative health clinic. And prior to that, in Austin, Texas, getting my master's in acupuncture and herbal medicine. Lots of training in functional medicine as well. And talking about preconception and detoxification work is one of my passion projects. It's something I am super excited to talk about with everyone tonight. So it's going to be an interesting presentation. And yeah, we can go ahead and get started. But I do want to mention again, I would love for this to be interactive. So if anyone has any questions, please at any time feel free to interrupt me. If you aren't comfortable being on camera, you're welcome to put your questions in the chat box and I can answer them. And we'll do a little bit of a Q&A at the end as well.
And I
So
know we did have some questions come in, so we'll leave a lot of time for Q&A anyway.
yeah, absolutely. That sounds perfect.
Allow multiple presenters to share.
Perfect. That would be great. Amazing. All right. And I will go ahead and share my screen so everyone can see this now. Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Julie. So again, tonight we're going over detoxification for preconception. This detoxification, especially before a fertility journey, and again, we'll talk about what exactly this means, but it's about coming back to not only our a more optimal sense of health, being able to kind of clear out a bunch of the things that we're being exposed to on a day-to-day basis, but also really coming back to our sense of self and letting go of things that really no longer serve us, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So I love doing this work with women and also with men, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. And yeah, this is something I am super passionate about. So again, I know I just did a little bit of an introduction, but just to reiterate, I'm a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist. So I study traditional Chinese medicine. I'm a functional medicine specialist. I have many certifications in functional medicine and lots of different mentorships with some really amazing practitioners that I learned a lot from. I am also a certified hypnotist, and every time I say that, it makes me laugh a little bit because I sort of can't believe I have that credential. But at Rev Health, especially, we do so much work in helping people reshape their subconscious mind, their limiting beliefs, that makes it possible for them to believe that they can heal and what's possible. So I'm adding that in there. And then I consider myself a personal toxicity and detoxification expert, not only through my formal training, especially with functional medicine, but I personally have also dealt with lots of toxicity and detoxification issues. In my own personal health journey, I have dealt with mercury, aluminum, and lead toxicity, mold toxicity, Lyme disease, lots of viral infection issues, and gut dysbiosis. I mean, you name it, I have probably been through it myself. So, not only through my formal training in both traditional Chinese medicine and functional medicine, but also my own personal journey. I have dealt with a lot of toxic issues and had really questioned at a lot of points, was my fertility going to be okay? Was I going to be someone who was able to have children knowing that this level of toxicity was in my body? And at some points along that journey, that answer was very unclear. But now, being on the other side of it, having taken myself through our own protocols, I can assure you that there are answers and there's so much hope on the other side. You just need guided support and care along with you on the process. So, if you are someone who's struggling with a lot of toxicity in your life, I just want to assure you that there's so much possibility and so much hope. So, we're going to talk about toxins, and This topic is it gets a little bleak because there is so much toxicity in our modern day world. And so, what we're going to talk about, especially in the beginning of this presentation, it is a little bit heavy. It is a little bit hard to hear. And by the end of this presentation, I want you to know that there should be such a sense of empowerment that there's so much you can do about it. So more knowledge is power, but I just want to warn you in the beginning, it will be a little bit discouraging potentially. It will feel a little bit heavy due to the nature of what's going on in our world. But again, so much hope. So hang with me as we go through the beginning of it. So in terms of modern day toxicity, the number of man-made chemicals is probably exceeding above 350,000. That is a massive amount of chemicals that we were not inherently supposed to be exposed to that are naturally occurring. And unfortunately, in more of the chemical business, these chemicals are really considered innocent until proven guilty, which really should be the other way around when it comes to health. So examples of this, like, I don't know if anyone remembers DDT, the pesticide that was used in the 1950s. It was used everywhere, and then it was found to be super toxic to the environment and super carcinogenic for our health. It has since been phased out. We don't use DDT anymore, but the remnants still exist, and it's often found in most of the population today. And we didn't know that until we had those detrimental effects, which typically come years after things are circulated. So others examples of that are chemicals like Teflon, which are still in circulation. We know that it has dramatic health impacts, but yet it's still allowed in certain, especially the processing of pans, nonstick pans, or things like raincoats. And we don't have a lot of long-term studies on these chemicals. So to have that many chemicals out in circulation is a big deal. And pesticide use has nearly doubled since 1990. So pesticides are used to help crops grow, especially genetically modified crops. They're specifically engineered to withstand pesticides, so crops are able to grow more effectively, but it has come at a pretty significant impact to our health. Stephanie Seneff, who is an MIT PhD, wrote an unbelievable book on pesticides. If you want to go down this rabbit hole, it's a little bit depressing, but how it has really impacted our own physiology and the health of the planet. Our plastic production has doubled in the last 20 years, but more specifically in the last decade, it has dramatically increased. I don't know if people have seen this on social media, but we supposedly consume about a credit card's worth of plastic per week, just given the amount of plastics that we're exposed to. So that can come from plastic water bottles. It comes from our clothing sources. It's in our tap water. It's really ubiquitous in the environment. So plastics are something that we can't totally avoid, but we can reduce our exposures. And the average person currently is getting about 50% of their daily intake from processed foods alone. And we'll talk a little bit in a couple more slides why this is so significant. But people are really consuming more than half of their diets from food-like substances rather than actual food that aren't giving them the nutrients that they really need for their body systems and their physiology to thrive. So that is, I know, a little bleak picture of our modern day toxicity. And then going into our modern day infertility, sperm counts have dropped by 50% in the past decade. So a lot of people associate more of reproductive issues or infertility with women, but it is actually 50% is related to men and male sperm. And knowing that those sperm counts are dropping, again, typically from more toxin-based issues, heat exposure to the genital area, and even EMF exposure, like putting cell phones in pockets, has reduced sperm count really significantly. Assisted reproductive therapies, or ART, which includes IVF, have increased more than 50% in the past decade. And we can feel that. I mean, at this point, everyone knows someone who's, or at least multiple people who have been through or are going through IVF. The number of couples or individuals who are even in their 30s are having to go through IVF is skyrocketing. It isn't exactly a secret that these things are, that IVF is becoming much more popular. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this as well, but when I have conversations with people, people will say, oh, we were actually able to naturally conceive. Like that is becoming more of the abnormal versus the normal potentially trending towards an IVF picture. And there's nothing inherently wrong with IVF, of course, but we have to ask, why is this coming up so significantly? What's going on here? PCOS is the number one cause of female infertility. It's risen 65% in the last decade. PCOS highly driven by metabolic issues, inflammation, and toxins. 1 in 36 children are currently born with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, which has dramatically increased, especially in the past decade. And then 1 in 5 children struggles with childhood obesity, and that has dramatically increased in the past decade. And we have to wonder why. And are there things that are happening when the mother is giving birth or that she's pregnant that are then potentially setting those children up for different metabolic pictures? And my answer to that is yes. So again, I think this is a little bit bleak to look at, but again, we're going to go through a lot of solutions and answers. So I want to talk a little bit about like how did we get here? What exactly is going on? We went through more of like we're having this increased picture of toxins that are clearly more ubiquitous in our environment. And at the same time, we're seeing fertility issues really be on the rise and having issues in fertility in general. And I want to kind of walk everyone through like why we might be seeing this. So our bodies are exceptionally resilient. We have so many checks and balancing systems in order to support our physiology that we can come into contact with toxins and with stress and with poor diets and sunburns and be completely fine. Our bodies have so many self-healing mechanisms to keep us safe and keep us protected. But where we're seeing issues today, this is just one example of our major antioxidant source, glutathione. And glutathione, again, our body's most potent, most abundant antioxidant source. It's going to be what protects our cells from damage from these 4 factors like sun damage and environmental toxins and poor nutrition and stress. We need good nutrition to make glutathione. We need things like magnesium and zinc and B vitamins and selenium in order to make enough glutathione. Now, as we just discussed, 57% of our diet's coming from hyper-processed foods. Most people are deficient in magnesium. Most people are deficient in zinc and also selenium and typically all the others as well. So we're now, because of our low nutrient dense diet, we're having less glutathione being produced. At the same time, we're having an abundance of these environmental toxins. The body's having a hard time meeting up, being able to protect our cells against all these toxins. These toxins also themselves lower glutathione even further than what it already is. So we're set up in this situation where we don't have enough protection, we're not having enough nutrition, and we're having an onslaught of environmental toxins that then is creating this issue. It isn't just quite that we have so much toxicity in the environment. That is somewhat true, but it's also that we don't have enough nutrition to really impact our physiology to get us to a place that we can be super protected. So it really is a combination of all of these things acting together in one. And I hope that makes sense to everyone. And what I will also say is that different parts of the body are impacted by these things differently. There are some areas that aren't as metabolic, they can handle stress more adequately, but our reproductive systems are exceptionally sensitive. Our eggs, when they develop, they're housing this really precious genetic material that's housed by this follicle. And those genetic materials and this follicle can be really susceptible to damage from DNA because it's so delicate. So when we don't have enough protection, those areas like eggs and sperm get hit even more dramatically. And this is why we're seeing an increase in fertility issues more than anything. So now we're going to go into 4 of the common pollutants that I see most elevated on people and what exactly they are, their associated conditions, and what we can do in order to detox those substances, what we can do to get rid of them, really a lot of them today. So BPA, a lot of people have heard about BPA at this point. It is a plasticizer. It makes plastics a little bit more flexible. So think about like plastic water bottles. It's used often in food packaging. It is also thermal paper, like the cash register receipts, canned food items, and plastic water bottles, and it also accumulates in dust. And we'll talk about why dust is so important in a little bit. A lot of people have heard about BPA at this point, and again, some companies will advertise, instead of BPA, we're doing BPA free, which is typically BPS. It's a very similar chemical to BPA, and like we talked about in the beginning, oftentimes these chemicals just aren't well studied, and BPS appears to be exceptionally similar to BPA. So I would encourage you not to fall for the BPA free marketing. So associated conditions with BPA include both male and female infertility. Elevated levels of BPA are associated with infertility in both men and women. PCOS, like I mentioned, can be highly derived by toxins. Decreased sperm concentration and motility. So BPA having an effect on both the frequency at which sperm can move and the concentration of it. Mothers who have elevated levels of BPA in their system have been shown to have increased ADHD in their children. So emphasizing that, yes, preconception work is about being able to really address what's going on in your own body for your own fertility, but it is also impacting what is being passed along to children along the way. So understanding that when we do have elevations in some sort of toxins in our body, it can really impact the chemistry and the neurology of our children. And then decreased women who go through egg retrieval processes with elevated levels of BPA can have decreased egg retrieval numbers and quality. So we're seeing this a lot. Egg retrievals are becoming more and more prevalent, especially women in their 30s. And if we do have these levels of elevated BPA or other toxins when we're going to do this egg retrieval, the outcomes may be poor. They may have a poor egg retrieval process, or the quality of those eggs maybe isn't as optimal as what they may have hoped, especially if they're doing it to get eggs from a younger age. So really important to take a look at this, not even before just fertility in terms of wanting to actually conceive, but also before an egg retrieval. And the best way to handle BPA, the great thing about BPA is that it really is in and out of your system. It does not stick around for a long time. It's like a couple days. So you don't really have to worry about it. But when we are chronically exposed to these things, like if we're drinking out of a plastic water bottle, for example, every day, then the BPA never leaves our system because it's chronically always in our system. And this is when it really starts to impact our hormones, especially estrogen. So avoidance is best. Like ditch your plastic water bottles, ditch the BPA free stuff. If you're going to canned food items are tough because if the canned item is acidic, especially like tomatoes, it really leaches in to the food product and it's really easily digestible. So if you're going to have things like canned tomatoes, just do it occasionally. It's okay to do it occasionally, but just not every day. But I would say the most important is switching your water bottles and switching from plastic food containers. So limiting to-go containers for takeout, switching to glass Tupperware containers, and definitely get rid of those plastic water bottles. So our next pollutant here, phthalates. A lot of people have heard of phthalates as well. Phthalates is huge for hormone health. It's really well studied at this point, especially for male fertility, actually. But phthalates is another plasticizer. It's found in many, many things, shower curtains, raincoats, plastic food wrap, again, dust, personal care products, and fragrances. And I would say the most important aspect here is personal care products. So they tend to be in lotions. Anything that has fragrance tend to have phthalates. And personal care products at this point, because phthalates are really well studied and a lot of people are more aware of the effects of phthalates, companies will list phthalate free. If it is phthalate free, you won't have to know, you won't have to guess, it will be on there. So just make sure you're going through your personal care products, like your makeup, your shampoos, your lotions, and just checking to see, is this phthalate free or not? And the great thing about phthalates, again, is that they are in and out of your system. So they do not stick around for a really long time. They are not hanging out. So as soon as we get rid of that exposure, you're going to see that decrease from your system within probably 2 weeks time, which is really, really excellent. So again, I get rid of any fragrances, personal care products, check to make sure it's phthalate free. For plastic food wrap, I use a lot beeswax paper, which is great. for plastic food wraps. You can also just store things in glass, which is amazing. I unfortunately don't really have a solution for shower curtains, but you can buy phthalate-free clothing now. A lot more companies are getting a lot more aware of that. And associated conditions with phthalates include infertility, both male and female. Endometriosis is highly, highly associated with phthalate hormone imbalances in male offspring. So women who go into a fertility journey with high phthalates in their system and maintain that throughout pregnancy have been shown to have hormone imbalances in their male children, has been specifically studied up to 14 years old. And this tends to look like ADHD and or anger outbursts. So again, these impacts that can have on children, not only like when they're first born or their first few years of life, but decades into their lives. So this stuff is really, really important to address beforehand. And then reduced IQ scores in children as well when we have elevated phthalates going into a fertility journey. And in terms of detoxing, avoidance is key. As always, with toxins, avoidance is going to be best. And then sauna use can be effective. Sauna for both BPA and phthalates has been shown to be effective, but sauna use is definitely not for everyone. It can be difficult if you've never worked with sauning before, especially depending on your toxin body burden. Sometimes sauning feels great for some people, and sometimes it's really a matter of building really low and slow. So make sure you are definitely working with a personal care provider, or if you're working with us at Rêve Health, to be able to determine your sauna titrating dose and to see if it's actually right for you. So the next two pollutants that we're going to walk through are they're more challenging to get out of the body, and they're more difficult to know if you have them unless you test for them. So cadmium is a heavy metal. This one isn't talked about as much in terms of fertility, but it's super important. The most common sources of cadmium are from cigarette smoke, is the most common, but you can also get it from ingesting foods that really took in a lot of cadmium growing in the soil it was in. And more women tend to have elevated levels of cadmium than men because when we have nutrient deficiencies, iron, zinc, and calcium, it is more easy for cadmium to be absorbed and held onto. And because women need more calcium than men, there tends to be the train of thought that that's why more cadmium is absorbed in their bloodstream. So cadmium is interesting. It sticks around the body for a really long time. So if it's in your bloodstream, where most of it isn't, most of it doesn't get stored in the blood, it lives there for about 4 months. But primarily, more than 50% of cadmium gets stored in the kidneys, where it lives for 10 to 40 years. So this is something that could exist within you for a really long time, and maybe you just have no idea. Oftentimes people experience this with like slowly declining kidney function, like they're having maybe their EGFR markers on their blood work are showing the kidneys are losing resiliency over time, and sometimes cadmium toxicity is a real reason for that. And then associated conditions, gestational diabetes. So how many women do we know that go into a fertility journey that then develop gestational diabetes, which is blood sugar imbalances during pregnancy? And sometimes an underlying reason for that is cadmium toxicity. So a huge root cause of a really big problem. Miscarriages can be due to cadmium toxicity, fibroids, endometriosis, male infertility, and reduced children with IQs. So cadmium is a really big one to rule out to make sure you're going into a fertility journey, so we're not having blood sugar imbalances down the line. So that we're not dealing with things like fibroids or endometriosis, or we don't have a partner who's dealing with infertility because of cadmium toxicity. And detoxing, again, you definitely, with heavy metals, you absolutely have to work with someone, no question, because it can be challenging for some, and again, for others, it's totally okay. But it's all about finding a titration about how much you can pull out of the body safely. And because so much is stored in the kidneys, we really want to work on kidney health, which can involve a lot of hydration, sometimes doing hydrations with certain juices to increase potassium and to make the urine more alkaline. It will make it more likely for cadmium to clear. Nutrients like NAC and magnesium and binders can be really helpful for getting cadmium out of your system. Green tea, glutathione can be really protective against the cells while cadmium is in the body to reduce against that stress that the toxins are putting on the body. And then again, sauna use can be helpful if it's applicable for you. to help in combination with binders pull cadmium out of the system. So not a heavy metal that a lot of people think about or talk about a lot, but one that's really, really important and one that we look at on our hair heavy metal test for people to see what their cadmium levels are. And then the last heavy metal that we'll look at is mercury. And mercury is such an interesting heavy metal because mercury can be passed down through 4 generations. So as someone who has personally dealt with mercury toxicity, there is just no way that that came from just ingesting like big tuna or a lot of tuna. As we know, mercury comes from especially big fish like tuna and swordfish, but it can also come through generations. So when I tend to see elevated mercury levels on, especially with women, I'm not necessarily thinking about, was this something that came from themselves unless they're eating a lot of fish. I mean, like it has to be kind of a lot. I'm more thinking about this came from generations and that have been passed down through their family over time. So the half-life for mercury is 49 to 120 days, so a little bit less, well, a lot less than cadmium, but mercury is it can be pretty toxic. Associated conditions are thyroid issues. It has the affinity for the thyroid gland, which sits in our throat, so mercury tends to accumulate there. It can result in blood sugar issues. So people who have a lot of like unexplained blood sugar issues may be dealing with a heavy metal, particularly mercury issue, because there's a lot of inflammation at the receptor site with insulin, where insulin's having a really hard time getting into the cells. Antinuclear antibodies, ANA elevations, which are associated with rheumatoid arthritis, strongly associated with mercury toxicity. It can result in children with ADHD and lower IQs if it's passed through the placenta. Mercury is one of those heavy metals that can really easily transfer through the placenta and through the blood-brain barrier during pregnancy. So something to definitely think about, especially before a fertility journey, getting your mercury levels evaluated. And detoxing, microbiome support, probiotics are great because a lot of mercury is primarily excreted through the bowels. So we need to have lots of good, healthy gut bacteria in order to be able to bind to and get rid of that mercury. So having good nutritional support, if you want to see our registered dietitian, Skylar, she'll definitely help you out. And our nutrients like NAC, curcumin, which is the active ingredient in turmeric, brassica family vegetables, which are sulforaphanes, which are going to help with that detoxification process. Really great for mercury specifically. So that brassica family is Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, all of those like leafy, well, not necessarily leafy, but like tree-like looking greens. So some people love them, some people hate them. Green tea is also really protective for our cells. As we noticed on the last couple slides, as the teas, green tea and black tea can have, as long as they're organic and ideally loose leaf, they can have lots of protective qualities. The same applies for decaf if you're caffeine sensitive. And then sauna use, again, definitely work with someone. Mercury is one of those heavy metals. It's super corrosive. There's a reason why these metals get stored in tissues. They're really safe there. The body will put them there because it does the least amount of damage. And when we're actively bringing them up, it can cause a little bit of inflammation. So you just want to make sure that you're definitely working with someone to address things like heavy metals for sure. So just some everyday practices that you can do in terms of detoxification, especially prior to a fertility journey. Brassica family vegetables. So again, those Brussels sprouts, the broccoli, the cauliflower, making sure you're having like a serving of those a day. They are going to really help bind out toxins through the digestive tract. They're really great for especially really detoxing like unhealthy forms of estrogen into healthier forms of estrogen. So I'm a big, big fan of those. Antioxidant foods, especially berries, are blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, wild blueberries are fantastic. Cranberries, even cherries are great to include to have more antioxidant sources, again, to protect us from some of the oxidative stress that happens from just the inevitable amount of toxins that we're exposed to and the ones that have accumulated in our bodies. Sauna 2 to 3 times a week if it's applicable for you and you have medical clearance to do that. Again, starting really slow, working your way up. A lot of people ask, I get this question a lot, like, is infrared sauna or traditional sauna better? And my answer is whatever you can tolerate. I actually, there's more studies done on traditional saunas versus infrared. So I tend to like traditional saunas better actually, but they are way hotter. So, and a lot of people can't handle that, especially right away. Whereas infrared, it's much more gentle and a lower heat. So it depends again on what you can tolerate, and make sure you work with us or someone to be able to find what works best for you. Air filters are super important. As we talked about, dust accumulates a lot of crap in it. So whether it's the phthalates, it's the BPA, mold, you want to be sure that you are, the air filters can really help filter out a lot of that stuff, but regular dusting is helpful too. And especially if you're in an apartment where you even suspect that there's mold, get an air filter, put it in your bedroom, leave it running 24/7, and just close the door when you're gone for the day, so that when you come home, you have a very clean environment that is possibly mold spore free. Even if there is mold in there, at least you're having a really clean circulated airflow as you've been gone throughout the day. That's something that I do in my personal house. Water purifiers are super important. There's so much stuff in our tap water. You know, we're in Boston, Massachusetts, where the pipes are super old. It is not uncommon for there to be lead in those pipes or different kinds of heavy metals. So making sure you get a water purifier that can help filter out those things is really important. Our tap water also includes things like plastics and antibiotic residue and birth control residue, and it can be pretty detrimental to be consuming that regularly. So I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of things that will impact your day in multiple times. Like you're going to get for the most for your investment, a water purifier and an air filter are two really big things. They cover the absolute foundations. Open your windows. Our indoor air is much more polluted than our outdoor air because we have a lot of things going on inside in terms of dust and exposures. And if we can get air circulating, and I know it's freezing here in Boston, but even just like opening up the windows for a minute, let the air flow, and then close them is enough. Dust regularly, like we talked about. Please ditch your plastics. No more plastic water bottles. No more plastic Tupperware containers. These things can make a really big difference, especially very quickly in your hormone health. And the thing with plastics is, especially with heat and especially with fat sources, so that tends to be the worst. When you are storing things that are hot, the plastics can leach into the food. But when the food has a higher fat content, the absorption is it's much, much greater. So if you're storing anything, whether it's maybe like a soup with cream or a piece of meat with some fat on it, or anything that has high fat content, it's going to be that plastic is going to be absorbed so much easier. So especially making sure that those items are stored in glass is really, really important. And clean up your personal care products. Again, look for phthalate free. Look for ideally, now there's more like organic makeup brands and organic shampoos, but definitely phthalate free and fragrance free is always my preference for people. So I do want to go over just the traditional Chinese medicine approach briefly before we get to our Q&A. So when we think about preconception from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, and this is really the perspective we bring to Rev, is that the physical is really important. That we want you having good quality sleep, we want you having optimal nutrition, reducing your toxin exposure, reducing stress, reducing inflammation. All of those things are going to dramatically impact a fertility journey. This is the physical body, and that's what's really important. But the other half of this is the emotional aspect. And in traditional Chinese medicine, both the physical and the emotional combine to form what is called Jing, G-I-N-G. And Jing is really, it's like your juicy life force essence. It is the core of who you are, your absolute, your being. What makes you you, what you've been passed on through your parents, and the combination with who you are. And this is really your essence. And the other component to this Jing, this essence, is emotional. Being able to access the depth of your true potential, being able to live in your true authenticity, being aligned with your true destiny. This is what is going to help when we can live in a state of expansion, which is being open to the opportunities around us, being open to the world around us and connected. When we're living in our authenticity and being aligned, we're able to expand. And yes, is more metaphysical and maybe metaphorical, but in a literal sense, when we are living in a state of expansion and not contraction, not fear, not protection, expansion is increased blood flow. It is increased lymphatic flow. It is increased parasympathetic state, which relaxes our organs. It allows things to detox and to digest and process. So when we can be in the state of true potential, when we feel like we are aligned with our true destiny, this is when we have the greatest chance for fertility outcomes because we are supporting our physiology so strongly. So this is a lot of the work we do with our reports, which are almost 60 pages. We get into the physical aspect, yes, but also the emotional understanding that this is also the work of preconception, to be able to set yourself up in your physiology, realigning with your sense of authenticity and destiny in order to step into a fertility journey with more ease. Super important. And before we get into any questions, I do just want to mention, so I did talk about our foundation protocol a lot tonight, that it's specifically for women. Preconception, perimenopause is another big area that we work with women in, but really any women who want to take a deep dive into their health to understand their health from a nutrition standpoint, inflammation. We do cortisol testing, but it also has a lot of toxicity testing. So an environmental pollutants panel that goes over some of the things we talked about today. A whole heavy metal and minerals panel, which is also some of what we talked about today, to get you into the best physical, emotional, and spiritual place in a preconception journey, or any kind of journey as a woman or any kind of transition. We also recently, and very excitingly, released our prologue protocol, which is for both men and women. So if you're not quite ready for the foundation protocol, which is 2 rounds of testing over typically a period of 6-ish months, we do have this prologue protocol, which is just blood work. It doesn't get into the toxicity-based markers or the cortisol, but it gets into hormones. And we really do a comprehensive evaluation of your health from your blood work standpoint, your physiology, and also our in-depth intake form that goes through all of your lifestyle-based factors, your sleep, your nutrition, your stress levels, your sense of purpose, everything. So that is an option available for you too. Again, men and women, it's a little bit of a lower pricer point. So if you're not quite ready for like the full detoxification, full steps, that is available too. And I wanted to mention that. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has about preconception or anything in general. Hello, Julie.
You, Maddie. Just want to say thank you.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome.
Any questions? I know we have a couple that came in, and then Jennifer had to leave.
Oh, Jennifer has
Had questions.
no worries at all.
Well, one question, this is a heavy hitter.
Yes, we love the heavy hitters.
Why is it that I'm always the one that asks the heavy hitter questions? What happens if you're already pregnant and have toxins?
Yes. So this is a heavy hitting question because I know a lot of women get really nervous, whether maybe they're currently pregnant or they've been pregnant and they're like, oh my gosh, oh no, like I just learned about this. What is there to do? Everything is figure outable. So when we have children who may have inherited some accumulated toxicity, and I was definitely one of them, often you can absolutely address this with children down the line. It's a matter of knowing and being able to provide that child with support to be able to test, do they have accumulated heavy metals? Is this something that we need to be concerned about? And those are really the big ones that can get transferred down the line. The more things like the BPA and the plastics, those things can go in and out of the system so quickly that now that we know, we can just avoid our children being in contact with those things, which is really wonderful. But the big heavy hitting ones, like the metals that can be transferred, you can always address that with them when they're old enough to remove that safely from their systems.
Right. Great questions. I mean, as a 1973 baby, when there was DDT and our parents smoked.
Yes, yes.
So, still possible.
It's entirely possible. Yes, there's so much you can do about it. There's so much you can do about it. And there are people, and even people who specialize now in detoxification for children, practitioners, and really, really cool to see those people. I'm not personally one of them, but it's really cool to see those people popping up, who can really help people who are in this position of like, wait, this is something that I feel now empowered to address. How can we do it?
Do I see any other no chats in?
It's okay if there are no questions. But I just want to make sure I answer them if there are. Yeah, toxicity, it is a tough topic.
There's so much we can do. I mean, I took the foundation protocol, of course, and it can, I mean, especially with where I live, downtown Boston,
Mhm.
and we came up, we identified some stuff, and getting an air filter makes the world of difference. There are things to do every day, and it
Absolutely.
doesn't have to be expensive. And even the reverse osmosis water filter that I just bought with the Black Friday sale.
I know it's amazing.
Right. So little, but I mean, I do think that obvious, like real obvious ones would be don't drink out of tap water. Like just don't
Yeah,
do that. It's not a good idea. It's probably going to have something in it that you don't want.
totally. I know it's always the things that are worth investing in are things that you're going to be consuming every day. So it's like air and water, just take care of it. I know that they're initially maybe more expensive ones to invest in. If you get a sale, that's the best. But there are things that are going to take you a really long way. And the air filters and the water filters both last like a long time. So you'll have them for a long time. It's a good investment. I'm all for it.
And not processed foods.
Not
That's
processed foods. It is so important. I know it's like these things individually don't seem like as big of a deal. But then when we look at the bigger picture and the bigger context, it's like, oh my gosh, we actually like do really need more vegetables. And we do really need to be eating like higher quality foods and avoiding pesticides when possible, because it all does accumulate, and that's when it is the problem, rather than these like individual things here and there. And no big deal. Our bodies are super resilient. Gotcha.
team fiber. Skylar.
Oh, Skylar, Team Five. I know, Skylar. I was thinking about you when I was looking at those Nebraska family recommendations, and I was like, Skylar will be so proud.
My least favorite foods, but I know how good they are. And actually, they're anti-fibroid foods. It's good all around.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. They are tough. Some people just really don't like them, and I get it.
Yeah.
But occasionally getting them in there in a non-painful way is important. Yeah, there's so much we can do, and this topic is big. And yeah, and I don't want anyone to ever discount, really leaning into your authenticity and your alignment is not, I mean, it's half of the issue. So yes, the physical is one part, but it's one part. Being in alignment with your true physiology and your destiny and your authenticity, it allows your body to be able to go into self-healing so much more quickly and easily. So it really is, don't discount that part. A lot of people do.
I know it used to be very woo, and then I moved to San Francisco, and it's sort of what people do. It's part of the ethos out there. So if anybody is joining from California, it's a little different, and it's considered like it's a must. Like you wake up and you're just joyful, and it is true. I mean, think about it. Like people who are really, really, truly happy tend to be less sick.
Yep,
They're just
absolutely.
they're happy. They avoid, relationships that, Maddie, as with me, it's like it's just no is a full sentence for me.
Yep, yep. That's all you need to say.
Yeah, toxins are toxins.
Toxins are toxins. Yeah, of course.
I'm so glad everyone could join us. I know it can be a lot at night after work in the winter when it's dark out, but we do. So yeah, I would say the foundation protocol is definitely the one if you're trying to detoxify, if you want to get pregnant within the next 2 years, for sure. Absolutely. Or if you've known hormonal imbalances, which even with the fibroids that I had, I did not even know that a possibility of those was because I grew up on a golf course.
Hmm.
And Maddie pointed that out to me, and it was really life-changing. I mean, there was many factors, but that was definitely one of them. And the glyphosate that was in my body.
Hmm.
So that's not great. So there's a lot of things, and even as we get older, it's going to affect you. It's going to affect your health if you're full of toxins.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, these things tend to present themselves at some point, and it's usually at some point of transition. So whether it's, before you're trying to get pregnant and all of a sudden there are potential difficulties there, or whether it's, toxicity and perimenopause has a huge correlation, especially with declining estrogen and toxins leaching out of the bones. It's a huge cause of symptoms that people often don't talk about. And so my recommendation to everyone is, we live in a world where unfortunately these toxins, it's a part of our healthcare now, and being proactive about it is really important. So you don't reach a point where of a hormonal transition that then these vulnerabilities come to the surface. The best course of action is to know and be prepared, and then to take action so you don't experience those symptoms or complications. It's so possible to have natural conceptions with healthy children, and it's just about taking the steps and evaluation to see, like, what am I working with here. And if I, by the way, had tried to conceive a few years ago, I mean, I don't even think it would have been possible given the amount of toxicity that was in my body, and that is absolutely not the case today.
It's
So it's
heartbreaking too. Women who are experiencing multiple miscarriages or IVF rounds that aren't working, and sometimes we look at it and you look at the labs and it's crystal clear why that's happening. And so you could save yourself a lot of pain, physical and emotional pain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of
money.
course. Yeah, yeah,
I know the foundation protocol is a little hefty. We do have payment plans for that, by the way. And so it can be as low as like $100 a week or month, actually,
hmm
depending on how long you want to do that for. But for me, it's like I wish I had had that because I ended up with surgeries and inability to conceive in my 30s and 40s.
right. It's what a difference. What,
Cautionary tale.
yeah, of course. Of course.
Well, ladies, it's good to have y'all join us.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I hope that everyone enjoyed our presentation tonight and maybe
I'll
learned
send it.
something about preconception.
I'll send this out to I'll send it. We'll send everybody an email with the recording, and then we'll put it live probably on Instagram and YouTube tomorrow. And then if anybody has any questions about anything, you can always schedule a 15-minute call. It's on the website. You're gonna get either Maddie or me, most likely Maddie.
Yeah, we would love to talk to you.
And if you have any questions afterwards, you can just email us at hello@revhealth.com if you think about something in the next few days. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. Enjoy your non-toxic tips. Yeah, let us know if you need anything.